Welcome to Head and Heart and Home. We're excited to have you listen to our conversations. This is a channel created by women, empowering women to take intentional action in creating the life they want with your hosts, Shanda Ceretti, certified life coach, and Carla Center, subconscious healer. Morning, Shanda.
Good morning.
What topic are we talking about today?
Well, something that kind of dawned on me just yesterday was the topic of being intentional. So I find this one a really powerful one, and I'm really excited again to bring a new topic this week to share with all of our listeners around being intentional versus autopilot, right? So let's just kind of dive in, see where this rabbit hole takes us, and let it just kind of flow. So, the first thing that comes to mind to me, I kind of just shared it, is the whole idea of being intentional. So, picking and choosing and deciding versus that autopilot running, because
Right.
those are the options, right? It's from my perspective, that's the options. You have two. You're either intentional or you're unintentional,
Right.
right? So one of them is in your conscious brain where you're manifesting and you're creating. The other one is in the unconscious brain or subconscious brain where programs and patterns and survival mode is kind of turned on. So you're just
Right.
going through the motion. So I don't know. I'm going to pause there for a second. I want to see what you want to add to that, and then we'll just roll with it.
Right. And as a subconscious healer, I can tell you that when you are on autopilot, like when you're driving someplace and you have a lot on your mind, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't remember getting there, that kind of mind, um, things just happen and you filter things out. Like when you're that you don't even remember the cars or anything that happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this with the subconscious mind being in control, it filters out over 90% of all the stimulus that comes in through all your senses. So when you're not intentional, you get about this much of the information. And so to create with that much information is very limiting.
Yeah. And you bring up a beautiful point too, where when we're in our unconscious or subconscious mind, that is not a place of creativity. That is not a
Mhm.
place of manifestation, right?
Right.
We aren't creating anything new. We aren't making anything new happen. It's almost like Groundhog Day.
Yes.
And it's so funny that actually we are talking about this because even just the idea of being intentional really allows for you to be present in your life, right? Because you're in the moment. You're being intentional with every single action you're taking. And so for me, this showed up just this morning on my walk. I live out in the woods and I had a beautiful walk this morning. And it's funny because before I even left the house, I remember in my head having the debate of do I want to listen to a podcast or do I want to just enjoy nature? And I knew I wanted to enjoy nature. So off I went without my headphones or anything like that. But while I was on that walk this morning, I kept finding myself thinking of stuff, trying to predict the future, worrying about things, contemplating all the things. So I kept being intentional about bringing my mind back to what I was doing because this was my thought. I have a very busy day today, which is wonderful. I get to connect with a lot of people today, including you, Carla. Very
Right.
blessed. And I was thinking, I'm going to be listening to a lot of information today. I'm going to be taking in a lot of information today. So, this walk this morning was kind of my gift to myself to center and reset and just kind of use it as a meditative practice. And so while I was out there, I was in this combative state almost with trying to recenter myself like over and over and over. I would go a few steps and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, my mind's way over here again.
Right.
Right. So I kept doing little kind of tasks to get myself to stay present. Do you ever find that you can lose focus, like kind of like what you were saying when we drive, right? Your
Right.
brain wanders off. You're like, I don't remember the last 10 minutes of this drive.
Right. Right. And it does. And that's how we end up with things like anxiety because we're so in the unconscious. So when I think of that, I didn't make my day intentional, I think about okay, then I have gone whatever routine I am normally on, which leads to survival, right? That is your subconscious mind's only job is for you to survive. It's not for you to thrive and have this magical life. It's just to survive. And so the things that you are aware of are only the things for you to survive when you are living in that unintentional stuff. And so your mind does wander. You go everywhere and you become super hyper aware of all of the little things that you need to survive,
Mm,
right? You're not like you're having a magical day, and if you kept letting it wander, you're thinking, oh, how am I going to get through this, to get through this, to get through this, instead of like really taking in and being aware of all of the wonderful opportunities in those moments. You're like thinking about the future and what's next, right? Instead of like having full awareness of what's going on in that moment.
yes. Yeah. The awareness, and what else? The other word that came up for me was the openness, right? Like,
Yes.
instead of trying to control all the things, which is all up in here,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, what if I just release that, let go of that, even if it's just for a few minutes, even if it's just for this walk. Let's let go of that need to control and overplan and overanalyze everything, and just enjoy being in the present, being in the moment, with the awareness, but also with the openness of, you know, taking in my surroundings. Because it's like when you're thinking, so for me, for example, what happened this morning as I was walking and thinking, it's like I knew I was walking through the woods. I stayed on the path, no problem. I didn't go like wandering off in the woods by any means,
Right.
but it was like it was almost this veil that came in my vision where I wasn't seeing and enjoying my actual surrounding.
Right.
I was seeing the things that I was picturing in my mind instead. So it was like it completely was erasing and taking over my current moment. It was really fascinating. And the other thing that I noticed too was, like you were saying earlier about anxiety. I noticed, like, not that anxiety was popping up, but I could feel anxious about certain things, or I noticed some limiting beliefs trying to creep in there, right? That I might be hypothesizing or guessing or assuming certain things, right? So that whole over analyzing and catastrophizing thing trying to come online, right? So I started to understand, you know, being in the moment is where joy truly is, right? That's where happiness lives, is being in the moment, being present, and being in the now. And that all requires the awareness, like you were talking about, and the intention of taking it in, right? It's like it's almost like you can flip from station to station. You can stay tuned into the now, right here, like you and me having this conversation,
Right.
or we can tune into another station kind of haphazardly or whatnot, right? 50% here, 50% over there. But I could start worrying, or I could start trying to plan what's coming next, or think about what already happened, right? So there's these different stations, and we'll call them three, right? We'll say it's the past, the present, and the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, right. And when you hear people talk about, and we talk about it with our clients too, infinite possibilities, when you are in that space, there are not infinite possibilities.
Mm,
When you aren't being intentional, your possibilities are limited, including in your relationships, connecting with somebody and truly like having this relationship that can flourish. Because if you're not being intentional about, okay, I'm not going to just be here and be ready to react, like I'm not listening to listen to you and really connect with you, I'm listening to react.
right.
We minimize the ability to have like our relationships flourish when we're not intentional about our day, when we're in that um the subconscious and all of the filters and all of our things, then we're keeping it very limited. I was at a bridal shower a couple of weeks ago and we had to give advice. And I said, remember, when you are in an argument, you are reacting from wounds from the past. And so is he. Give yourself and him grace. Because when we're unintentional, we're just like bouncing off of, we're planning our future based on the past and
Yeah.
never in current and reality.
Yes. It's funny. It's like what you just described. is like being unintentional is like grasping at straws. It's like you're just gonna, if you're falling, you're just grabbing anything that's there, right?
Mhm.
And so another tip there around the communication piece, right? It's like if we are intentionally, which is like authentically connecting with people, we're not grasping at straws. We're very aligned with our heart,
Yes.
right? Because when we're not aligned, when we're not being intentional, when we're running on autopilot, that's likely when things happen in your life that are undesirable.
Right.
Things that happen that you're like, oh, geez, I don't know how that happened or where that came from, right? Because they're not intentional. And like you said, they come from the past, they're old patterns, they're limiting beliefs, right?
Right, right. And as a former people pleaser, when you are not being intentional, like my whole life, I was this person who looked at what other people needed. And so that was for sure from my past. And so I never saw the possibilities in my life because I was so busy people pleasing and not being intentional about what, like, my reactions all had to do with somebody else and never to do with me. And then you lose like all these possibilities of and who you are actually, like when you're not intentional about your day and you are so like just surviving, you're pulling in all of those little things that you needed just to get through your childhood.
Yeah. And notice too that you tend to do things more for others and not in a good way. There's a good
Yeah.
way to do things for others, and then there's a way that works against you. It's self-sacrificing, right? And you end up doing things that you don't want to do when you're not being intentional, right?
Right.
And I don't mean things like, oh, you have to love every single thing that you do. No, but you do things that you normally wouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you disempower yourself and the other person.
Yeah.
um if you always do something for somebody and you never allow them to learn how to do it, because I would be a rescuer, that's not an intentional, that is intentional but not intentional at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go in and you rescue, you don't allow somebody else to be intentional and create the life they want. You're creating what you think they want, right?
Right.
Yeah. Intentionality is so big in every little thing. It's like when you go, you're in the store and you just walk the aisles and hope that you get what you want, right? When you're
Right.
going grocery shopping,
Right.
instead of being intentional, these are the things I want. I'm open to anything I come across,
Mm.
but like just taking in the whole thing instead of just like wandering and not knowing what you're doing and just what happens. Like
Yeah.
we've
That's
decided that that's our fate, right? Whatever happens, that's our fate.
yeah. I think the analogy that you just gave is brilliant. It's like it's reminding me of what you were saying about the grocery store. It's like going to the grocery store because you know you need food, but you didn't make a list before you went, so you're not being intentional about that trip. And guys, you guys who are listening, Carla, if you've ever gone to the grocery store without a list, I can guarantee two things, three things. You got a whole bunch of stuff you didn't plan on getting. You forgot probably half the things you needed, and you
Right.
spent way too much money, right? So,
Right.
I mean, it's just a silly analogy, but it really does apply, right? The same thing applies when we're not being intentional, we're not choosing the things that we want in our life, much like a grocery list. Maybe you got things that were not healthy. Let's apply that to life. Maybe you're choosing things unintentionally that aren't
Mm-hmm.
supportive to what you need and what you want in your life, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this brings me to like multitasking, right? Especially as moms, especially as women, we multitask all the time. And I'm telling you, that's been something that I've been working on breaking and getting out of for so long. I used to think, I used to take pride in being a multitasker. I was like, oh,
Right.
this is so good. I can do so many things at the same time. But what I found out was that the things really never get done. It's a bunch of things left open, and it takes so much longer to get those things done because I learned something on my journey and through my training that I've done is that every time you switch tasks, you lose energy, you lose momentum, right? So if you're switching, and my brain is very, very task oriented, right? And it likes to flip through. Sometimes I can get bored easily, and so my brain will try to get me to get up and do something else, or I'll be walking over here and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I see that, and then I go over here, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh my gosh, I felt like I got nothing done today. So multitasking isn't something to pride yourself on. What we get to retrain our brain on is focusing on one thing at a time, because that is how we actually get to invite and encourage balance into our life, right? I can guarantee you at the end of the day that you've multitasked, you're probably drained, you feel overwhelmed. And the worst part is that you feel like you didn't get anything done, right?
Right. And it's also when you're a multitasker, because I was a multitasker too, you're never focused on one thing, right? So you have to try and remember where you were when you left.
Yeah.
And you're also willing to, if you're at a job where you keep saying, I was the person who would raise my hand, I'll be the hero because I was a good multitasker, right? I can do all these things. It is such an invitation for anxiety and overwhelm to come into your life.
Yeah.
And you feel unaccomplished because
Yeah.
even when you get to the end of them, you're like, I don't remember how I got there. I'm going to have to do it again
Yeah.
sometime because I've shown that I can do it to somebody else, but then I have to figure out how I did it because I wasn't conscious while I was doing it. I was just like getting all this stuff done.
Yeah.
Um, and even if you achieve your goals, how do you feel about that? You just feel like, "Ugh, it's done," instead of like, wow, look at what
Yeah.
I just created.
Yeah. This point is huge in my opinion, because it's like when we're doing this, what we're describing, the multitasking and just trying to get through the things and flipping back and forth, we're actually missing out on that journey. We're missing out on that experience. So even when you do get to the end of those things, it feels very unfulfilling, like you said, because you never really got to fully allow yourself to experience that thing. Like, guys, doing hard things is an amazing thing, because when you get done that hard thing, you can do this and give yourself a pat on the back. You can acknowledge yourself. But if you don't take that time to acknowledge your journey and experience your journey, you miss out on that whole celebration of
Yes.
completing the thing in the first place, right?
Right, exactly. And we don't tend to, when we're in those multitasking, celebrate us at all, right?
No, no, there's
Right.
no
It's
time.
always like when you're a multitasker, it's like I said, invitation to overwhelm and anxiety. You're thinking to the future
Yeah,
always,
yeah,
because how am I going to get through this? And what's the other thing I have to do? And your only goal is to get all of this long list done. You're to do. You are not aware. You're not intentional at all. You're just surviving through this stuff to get it done. And
yeah,
most of the time, you're doing it to get the praise or the validation from somebody else and not from yourself. You're not going to give yourself credit. And others' validation only lasts so long because then they're going to give you something else to do and that
if
goes away.
if you get it in the first
Yeah,
place.
if you even get it right.
We don't always
Right?
get that recognition that we work so hard for.
No, but when you're talking about really being intentional and doing it and really just enjoying the journey, you get to like be like, wow, I did that.
Yeah. You know, here's the flip side too. And this is just coming up for me now. I think this is really important to share. Enjoying the journey means enjoying the journey on both sides. So
Mhm.
when things are hard, when things aren't enjoyable, it's like, how can you find a way to still enjoy that journey? And I don't mean like, oh, I'm happy that I'm in this suck right now, but I mean experiencing your experience, like allowing yourself to feel all the things going through it. That's another
Right.
thing too, right? If we're so busy multitasking and flipping from channel to channel or task to task, we're not even experiencing our experience, which means we're not feeling the emotions that come with doing those things. Celebrating is one of them, acknowledgement is another, whatever the other ones are, pride, joy, happiness, whatever, right? We're not experiencing those. So we're even numbing ourselves emotionally through that whole process. It's like, I like to think of it like a computer. Okay, no matter what type of computer you have, no matter how fast your computer is, how new it is, how updated it is, you can only have so many browsers and apps and things open at one time before you'll get an error or it'll crash or something will go wrong, right?
Right.
So we are the same. We can only have so many programs or tasks running at the same time before we start to like short circuit or snap at somebody or break down or get sick or whatever else. Insert thing here.
Right. Right. And you don't really like get the skills down when you're doing things that way.
Yeah.
Right. And what I tell clients, I have, anxiety is a big deal for people, and you're pre-thinking of what all could happen and all that. And I tell my clients every new thing, think of yourself as a baby learning to walk.
Yeah.
You may trip, but you get back up and keep trying. Instead of making yourself wrong, be like, okay, I learned something from this.
Yeah.
But when you have all that programming going on, like imagine a baby holding like toys, you're trying to feed them, they're trying to learn to walk. I mean, too many things. And that's where the overwhelm and the anxiety come from, is
Yeah.
like too much stuff is coming in and you're not allowing yourself that moment of learning.
Yeah.
And like really, like when you think of all of the things that you've learned, and we tend to focus on like, oh my gosh, this didn't go right, but like all the things you've learned, and when you like truly take joy in it, which is what we're talking about, that journey, and be
Yeah.
like, wow, look at where I was and look at where I am, instead of, unintentionally just dismissing everything and just like on autopilot and survive, like to truly think about all of the things that you have like accomplished and who you've allowed yourself to be when you're in those intentional moments is just like, wow.
Mm.
And when we learn to numb, and we do, like if you're multitasking, you're numbing, there's food, there's all kinds of ways to numb. um, you're missing out on the whole. We want to avoid things we don't like, but we're missing out on the things that we want to.
Yeah. And it's interesting because what if, let me just offer this. I want to offer this to everybody who's listening. What if the only reason why you don't have the things that you want in your life is simply, and I will put it that way, simply because you're not being intentional about what you're doing with your time, with
Yeah.
your life, with your energy, with your money, with your relationships, whatever, you know? What if it's just that simple? What if you could be more intentional? What would
Yes.
change? How would your life change? What would you have? What would not be there that you maybe don't want to be there? Right? So, and it's funny too because as you were talking, Carla, it made me think of something where with the anxiety piece, when we rush to try and get through all the things to hopefully at the end have some sense of accomplishment or at least get recognition, we're rushing through everything. We're not experiencing our experiences or our emotion. That then becomes the pattern of how we get things done. So listen to what I just said for a second. Putting yourself in a state of anxiety is how you know to get things done. What? That's let's change that, right? Let's change that. Let's run a different pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and your expectations. So think about how closely excitement and anxiety are in feelings, right? Very close. And so when you get in that pattern of the anxiety, and it means anything that's unknown because you haven't been intentional is anxiety provoking. Like you're trying to look at all the bad things that could happen instead of being like, ooh, what could happen? What exciting thing could happen in my life? And you would associate the two as the same, not knowing what is excitement and what's anxiety. And so you're gonna go, when you're unintentional, it's that feeling is anxiety, automatically anxiety,
Yeah.
you know and so you're fearful of the unknown, and that in the unknown is where all those things that you want in your relationships, in your finances, all of it is in that unknown,
Yeah.
because it's not survive. It's
Right.
not survival. Survival doesn't give you all of those things. And the unknown can feel the same if you're not being aware and intentional about what you're doing.
Yeah. I want to back you up for a second here. So everybody who's listening, that was may have, not saying you had, may have been like, what is she talking about? All the things that I want are in that unknown, uncertainty area outside of that comfort zone. This is true. And here's the proof. You guys ready? The proof is in the fact that you don't already have what you want. That's how we know. If it was inside your comfort zone, if it was easy, if it was certain, it was guaranteed, all those things, you would already have it, right? That's why you have to do the things you've never done before to experience the things you've never experienced before, right? It's like, I want to make that a law or a rule, but we won't do that. That's not what we're here for. But yeah, right? I always like to say, you have to stretch yourself outside of your comfort zone to, first of all, have a different experience. But like, it's almost like you don't even know what's waiting for you out there. And it might be so different than what you had anticipated or thought. It might be 1,000 times better than you had ever hoped, because again, we have limitations on how much we let ourselves dream and how far we let our brains wander and explore. Some of us have our
Right.
brains on a really tight rope, a really short leash, and we don't allow ourselves to think big in those ways. So just imagine what is actually out there. What
Right.
are the opportunities waiting for me? And it is endless when you come from that type of thinking.
Right. And when you are grateful for those different moments that happen and realize like nothing is the answer, it's all like this beautiful, joyous journey, right? As we're being intentional and all of this stuff comes in, like just truly enjoying it instead of being like, okay, this is the answer to this. I can't enjoy that.
Right?
If you're intentional in your day, you notice like Shanda was noticing the beauty out in the forest while she was walking today.
It was a
Whereas
struggle. I'll admit.
while she could have been out just like when her mind wandered, she could
Yeah.
just let that have been and not felt the joy of nature and just really connecting and centering instead of like all this stuff is happening. I'm going to anticipate, I'm not going to be in my moment. You really got to enjoy what life had to offer you,
Mm.
no matter what came next.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to offer anybody who struggles with being present, being intentional, being in the moment. I'll give an example from my walk again. And this isn't something that I just did this morning. This is something that I do on a regular basis. On my walk, there is one of my favorite natural growing ferns, and it's called sweet fern. And we're just past the time now where it's really fragrant and you can really smell it as you're walking. Like, it's beautiful. It's intoxicating. I love it. But anyway, we pick it and we will make tea with this, and it's called sweet fern tea. It's delicious. Anyways, so when I'm walking and I get to where it's called Sweet Fern Alley, because it's literally just like meters and meters and meters of this stuff, and it's all you smell. When I get to that spot, I always pick a leaf and I smell it as I'm walking, right? And then I'll go a little bit more and I'll pick another leaf. And so by the end of it, I have this little tiny bundle, but I just keep grounding in smelling the leaves. And I know that might sound really silly, but it's, first of all, you're getting that aromatherapy from nature, right? You're surrounding, you're in the moment. And it's like the feeling of taking that in, something that is just naturally growing there. I don't know. There's something that is truly magical that happens for me on my walks when I'm able to do this. So, what I'm getting at here is, if you struggle, a good way to try and practice to like refocus your brain is when you're on a walk. First of all, I used to do this. Don't listen to music, turn that stuff off, right? Give yourself the silence in nature, give yourself that time to focus and like retrain your brain to be mindful, to be intentional, and to be present. So, what I was doing this morning, because I'm telling you, this morning was a struggle. I don't know why, but it was a struggle. So I'd be like, okay, listen to your feet. right? Listen to the ground under your feet. So it's like, it was like pebbles. So you could hear the rocks moving. And then I would switch to like look at the trees or watch the road and the road bend up ahead, and then smelling. So I was using my senses, right? So there's lots of different ways that we can kind of practice this. There's color walks. I think I've talked about that before. This would be like a senses walk, right? And when you think about it, we can do these things in meditation as well. You can sit down and you can meditate using your senses. You can sit outside and do this, but it's applicable in, like, it's transferable, right? We can use these in different ways. So try it on your walk. Go outside, sit down, try to use your senses. What do you hear? What do you smell? Maybe pick a piece of grass and put it in your mouth. What do you taste? Or just try and taste the air, right? But have fun with it. Yeah.
Right, as a way to like quiet your mind.
Yeah.
Because if you are somebody who is always thinking towards the future,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're not, I mean, you would think that I'm thinking towards the future, so I want to create the future, but no, you're trying to control the future.
Right.
It's a way to quiet your mind. The what Shanda's describing is a way to quiet your mind. And some of us, like when I first started meditating, I couldn't quiet my mind. So walking, and there is what's called walking meditation. And that's kind of what Shanda is describing to you. It's a way to quiet your mind by focusing on other things and getting all that stuff that is just swirling
Yeah.
and you can't control. And it's a great way to get centered before you do things. Um, and eventually, like most of the time, your mind is quieter and calmer. I mean, I can tell you, as somebody that would stay awake at night with anxiety, when I can't sleep at night, no longer is a million things going through my head. It is not that, which I never thought would be the case, right? Um, and I had an event. I was going to a place where I hadn't seen some people in over 10 years this last Saturday. And I would like plan and be so anxious and think, what's going to happen, right? But I intentionally went to have a joyous time, no matter how it turned out. And I would I came into contact with different people, had these amazing conversations, people that I hadn't seen before. And I mean, in over 10 years, and they remembered me. Like, why would you remember somebody 10 years later, right? My kid had gone to daycare with their kids. And it was just a joyous thing. Whereas before I'd been like just trying to survive, to support this woman who took care of my child when my child was just a little kid, and taught my child to read and like all this magical stuff. But I wouldn't have enjoyed her or these people that were part of my journey because I was all of the stuff going in my head. It's that calming, like Shanda was describing, that helps you while you're in your intention, be like, wow, look at all of the possibilities out here. Whereas before, I would have sat. I mean, Shanda can speak to this. I did not speak up unless I found a little spot to speak up and I didn't feel like somebody would judge me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My only intention in life was to survive each moment, and it's exhausting and miserable. And now my intention is to have joy, to be open to whatever comes into my life. And if something is spinning, I do like Shanda is the walk, um, meditate, anything to let me like let all of that stuff out and just be open to the infinite possibilities that we hear all of the people talking about in manifestation.
And what is so beautiful is that underneath the letting go of the things that are swirling, like you were describing, Carla, that is where our authenticity lies. That is
Yes.
where we actually live. But you got to get under all the crud and all the crap and just let it go. Right. And it's like, I went to an event recently as well, a networking event. And I remember being a little bit nervous, but a little bit excited. So, and that's a great feeling, a little bit of nervous, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
excited. And I started getting up in my head about like what to wear and all the things. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go as me. I'm going to wear something that feels comfortable. It feels like something that I would naturally put on. I'm just going to pretend like I'm going to visit friends or family and not make this a great big thing. Right. And I showed up there and I didn't know very many people. And I knew a few people in this room full of, I don't know, there was probably over 100 people. And I felt totally relaxed and I was able to connect with complete strangers. Maybe that's not surprising for some of you to believe, but I was able to talk to people and just put myself out there because I was just being who I am, right? I was being my eccentric, bubbly, full energy type me. And it was good and it felt good and I had a blast. So I want to encourage you, and I believe that's what Carla is doing too, is just to encourage you all to just be authentic. But that also comes from being intentional,
Yep.
choosing to stay in alignment with who you are, choosing to show up in a way that you know represents who you truly are all the time, right? Who are you when you're alone? Who are you when nobody's watching? Maybe you're somebody who sings or dances, but you don't do that in front of other people. That is where your authenticity is buried. That's where it's hiding, and that's what wants to be kind of dusted off. I was saying that to a client the other day. I'm like, we just got to dust you off. That's it. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing's broken. You're just,
Right.
the dust has settled.
Yes. Beautifully said, because
Yeah.
that's true. And that's part of that authenticity is part of that being intentional about our life. While we're intentional, we become very aware of when we're not being ourselves.
Mm,
Right. Awareness is so huge. And as you guys listen to us, you'll hear us talk about that.
yes.
I was very aware that I am not the quiet person that just speaks up every once in a while and so afraid to that I might be interrupting if I speak. If I speak my truth, I am going to somehow provoke somebody. And my event that I was talking about had 200 people at it. You wouldn't think a daycare, but this lady was she loved and taught our children for 46 years. Incredible person. And it allowed me to just be me. And that was not a comfortable place for me to be. As a healer, I'm always learning, I'm always growing, but my I would be like, this is what I'm good at, and keep myself in this little box. When you're unintentional, you are keeping yourself trapped in this little box of what you imagine will keep you safe.
Mm,
And when you're intentional, like Shanda had this amazing time at this networking event. And if she would have created this, like, I have to be this way, I have to be that way, her connection with other people and her experience would have been different. The same with me. I would, in fact, I had a coughing fit, by the way, in this thing, whereas I would have normally just got up and left because I hated being the center of attention. I didn't want people looking at me. And I'm like, no, this gets to be, and people came up to me that I didn't even remember. And they're like, oh, I remember you. And I'm thinking, I don't remember you, but I said who I was, and maybe they remember me, maybe they didn't. But to just make everything about like enjoying the moment, being intentional about being joyful in it, instead of like, oh my gosh, this happened, this ruined the whole time, and that's what it was about, instead of like, wow, look at all these other things. And I laugh about it, by the way, now. And I sometimes I must want to be the center of attention because the craziest stuff will happen to me, and I've learned to laugh about it instead of being like, like, oh my gosh, because it's just part of life. It's part of enjoying it. And was my intention to trip or cough or like, because all I did was eat a piece of something spicy and I breathed in spice and my lungs are burning. And it's, but my intention was the whole time to just have a joyful time, no matter what happened.
and it's interesting too because I find when we're not being intentional, so when we're unintentional, that's when it feels like things are happening to us,
Yes.
right? Like life is happening to us. It's like we're being shaped by our experiences. Whereas when you're intentional, you're creating your experience. It's
Yes.
very different. One is empowering, one is creative, one is like limitless and fun. The other one is um, really unempowering or disempowering, and it is soul sucking and it's limited, right?
Yeah. And there's fear in that. There's like, what's going to happen to me now? what's next.
Yeah.
Whereas when you've got that intentional creative, you're like, ooh, what can I do
Yeah, you're
now?
excited about what's next instead of being
Yeah.
like fearful, right? So
Yes.
even your energy inside of each one of those options, because that's what they are, right?
Right.
Are completely different, right? So, I mean, I hope you guys are really taking away some good nuggets here. This could even be one to go back and re-listen to. I mean, they all are, but like taking some notes, right? And like always, I want to encourage you, we want to encourage you to ask your questions, right? Post your comments below. Let us know what you think
Yes.
and how you feel, more importantly, how you feel about this episode. What resonates with you, and what are you walking away with today, right? What's that one thing that you're walking away with intentionally that could change everything for you?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have a day where you're unintentional, instead of going like, "Oh my gosh, I ruined my day by being unintentional." For me, it's always like, then be intentional and notice the difference in how you felt. Like, okay, this day didn't feel right. Oh, the whole day was just on autopilot. So tomorrow I'm going to be intentional. And if I get off track, that's okay. Cause I am working on it. Right. It's always a journey, and to just really appreciate yourself for being open to the journey and open to the awareness and be, because when they first told me to be intentional, I was like, what are you talking about? Being intentional. And they'd be like all these ways of being, and I was just like, I'm trying my best, and I would beat myself up. So allow yourself time, like I was talking about learning how to walk, allow yourself those moments and be like, okay, this felt, while I was intentional, it felt really good. And I'm going to just be open to the fact that it's going to take me a little bit to pattern interrupt myself,
Right.
you know, to and that's one of my favorite things to do with clients when they get stuck in that will of like beating themselves up. Let's pattern interrupt ourselves and be like, okay, even if for 10 minutes I was intentional, it's better than being not intentional at all.
Right. Right. You still made progress. It's still
Yes.
10 minutes you didn't have before, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And feel the joy that you felt in that 10 minutes.
Yeah. That's
The possibility.
yeah. I always like to share it's that 1% rule, right? So it's doing 1%. I don't even like to say better, but 1%. I don't know. We'll just say better for the lack of another word in this moment. 1% better every day, right? So it's about tweaking things as you go. And like Carla said, not beating yourself up about when you do forget, because you might forget. You legit might forget to be intentional because this is new, right? Or when you fall down, or when it doesn't work, or, right? Just have
Yeah.
that grace, have that love, and be kind and be gentle.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's all kinds of stuff. Like I've caught myself when I was tired, being
Mm-hmm.
right back in that whole thing.
Yeah.
And always knowing that you get to create tomorrow, you get to create today. And it is a choice to be intentional and create your life instead of just surviving, and whatever life throws at you, you're just going to get through that moment to the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have a new thing. We have a thing, Carla, I believe this was in leadership that we learned, and it was every moment is a new moment. So even
Mm-hmm.
if something didn't go as planned, or you forgot, or you slipped up, or whatever it is, there's another moment, new moment. Let's go. Right? Like,
Yeah.
don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till next week. Start right now. Just keep starting over. Just keep trying again. Keep doing
Yeah.
it differently. Right? Trial and
Yeah.
error.
Yeah. And enjoy it, right? Like not make things bad. And no matter how, what our age is or whatever, we get to each day create and try again and just enjoy that. So when you wake up and you're like, ooh, what's today hold? What's my intention today? Because I'm sure many of you will do like I did. And you wake up and you're just like, okay, I got to get through work. Then I got to cook dinner. I got to, that was my day. And I didn't notice most of the other stuff because I was just trying to get through each of those things. And being intentional, like, you see so much more, like Shanda sees in the forest.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's like that reminds me of that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. Well, you
Mm-hmm.
have to look, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to look. You have to look up. Yeah.
You have any more nuggets you want to share?
I feel like that's what I wanted to share. That's what's on my heart for today. Always coming back to authenticity, coming back to awareness, and coming back to just trying, right?
Right.
Just being willing to try something
Yeah.
new,
And as you're trying, not making yourself wrong.
right?
Enjoy the journey. Allow yourself grace. We all deserve grace, and it starts with ourselves, right?
Yeah,
Um, Life is so much more than we allow when we're in survival mode, and being intentional, allowing ourselves to like just experience, not make anything wrong, as Shanda was saying, don't make it wrong, just like enjoy and be through. Like, this is I get to create this amazing life. This is what I want, and the endless possibilities are there, and I get to make that choice.
beautifully said.
Yeah. So thank you for turning into our channel, From Head to Heart and Home, with Shanda and Carla. If you enjoyed our conversations, make sure you click down below and subscribe so you get our notifications. And be sure to join us next week for our authentic, connected conversation. Bye for now.